Salud amigos, tripulantes de
Greetings,
nuestra querida
friends,
contaminada
sailors of our dear, polluted, and only spacecraft. The same that, since the last time we met, has turned several times on its imaginary axis and continues generating events. News. It's not that it didn't do it before, but now there are much many stakes, geopolitical stakes, and we are much better connected by satellite. So sometimes we have to speak in real times, and other times we have to predict. If you see me sitting, it's because I have a very important guest. With us, Professor Fernando Travieso, economist, master degree, expert in oil, just to tell you something about his curriculum. What impressed me is his pedagogical way of telling us about the realpolitik that shows how we are in the hands of the great powers, unless we do not accept 7 U.S. Plants here in Colombia. Well, thank you very much for your invitation. Now let's start directly. How do you see things? Well, we have managed to appease our country. The strategy of President Maduro with a constituent assembly and the people of Venezuela with more than 8 million votes, and something very important that we put in the eyes of the public opinion, the role of oil transnationals as true instigators through the thinkers of the destroyers of the state. Part of the proposal that made us reach the constituent when we visited oil fields with PDVSA workers. There were 2 options: to go to direct confrontation with the transnationals, or knowing that their problem is oil reserve depletion, which caused this destabilization worldwide. With the process of peace in Venezuela, we should think first of the ratification of the partners of mixed companies, which is, I think, a fact, given the peace we have in the Republic, and an increase in the reserves that Venezuela has. How do we do that? We are currently accounting for 20% of the oil underground in the Orinoco Basin. This is a recovery factor, and it is calculated by a department in PDVSA through simulation, computer simulation. It is presented to international organism that verifies, and this is collected by the entire world and helps the companies that quote in the New York stock market through the Venezuelan government, because it endorses the value of the stock market. So that was a proposal that we made with the aim to create peace, and I think it is time to implement it, both the ratification of the partners in the mixed partners to duplicate from 20 to 40% the reserve on the Orinoco Basin. When we say 40%, this is the minimum amount given by the computers. So this is a conservative estimate that would reach us 550 million barrels, more than Saudi Arabia and Iran together. And this is certified. It's not no hypothesis, but it's certified by the financial world. So we created OPEC. We have to say it directly. We need to be united, and besides that, we have the majority of fields in the planet. Yes, and the last OPEC report issued 1 month ago, for the first time, Saudi Arabia recognized that their reserves are dropping. This was recognized by the Saudi government. I confess I only expected an expert like you to believe that, because a small drop from 266 billion to around 400 million barrel drop, but it marks a trend. They are acknowledged a trend. Well, any country with 400 million barrels would be shooting rockets, and this is a small drop. Besides, I'm going to use the laser. Let's remember what we've said many times ad nauseum. All this great oil reserve that the planet has always relied on, passing around here, the Capes, and coming up the Atlantic, and then the Caribbean until they arrived at Texas, because the idea is use other countries' oil and not the own, means around 45 days, and that's oil transport. But the planet's main reserves are here. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, irreverent, independent, poor example for our neighbors with 7 U.S. bases, and that also allowed sea, land, and air space. We are 4 or 5 days away. And of course, this places in the focus of any critical scenario, if we're talking about real politics, the center of the conflict for the control of reserves in the world. We are at the core of the planet center. What does that lead us? Well, we're living a conflict. Venezuelan society is living a conflict between the great powers for control of reserves and all the corporations that disagree with the nationalistic vision of the Bolivarian vision, with the legacy of President Chavez's vision, which is a continuation of Cipriano Castro, Romulo Gallegos, and a history of oil nationalism. For example, Venezuela is the only OPEC country that produced its first barrel with a company that was 100% national. 96 private capital and 4 state capital, 4%. In 1884, the national mining company, Petróleo del Táchira, knew what the business meant and reserved 4% of shares for the state. So this makes the world's first mixed company as well. Venezuela and oil's the same. Jose Maria Vargas said it. And it was a very shy participation or share, 4%, but it's the first state share in an oil company, and this we owe to General Blanca, to his business vision. That concession lasted until 1934, and General Gomez didn't renew. So now comes a very interesting phase, because with the ratification of the partners in mixed companies, and with the vision we have that PDVSA should implement an increase in the recovery factor from 20 to 40, as the Americans say, that the information energy, since the U.S. placed that on their pages, then let me tell you that came before a proposal made during President Chavez's period. It was publicly made by TV. We said that in order to avoid a conflict, the logical thing was to increase the recovery factor for a solution to the scarcity of reserves, by preserving the total and indiscussible sovereignty of Venezuela, by maintaining at least 60% of the shares, as Decree 5200 reads. We're talking about 60%. It's an exponential leap. Untouchable. Not everybody reached that. And even if you reduce even in 1 point, we are addressing a liberated area from the world powers. We have to be very careful there. This is very important. Please explain that, because there will not be no extraterritoriality. I will explain you in this way. There's a coincidence between the shares of the great oil companies, which I repeat are our partners. We have to ratify them, increasing the recovery factor for both parties' benefit. We have to know how they behave, to know what policy. Theoretically, it's a win-win situation, but we know how they are also. This is what we're going to do, because we're going to play in our favor. Chevron, main shareholder of Vanguard Group, verifiable, New York stock market. ExxonMobil, main shareholder of Vanguard. ConocoPhillips, main shareholder of Vanguard. All these are U.S. Total France, main shareholders, or one of the main shareholders, Vanguard Group, and through other investment funds. Vanguard is an investment fund that also controls Vanguard. Royal Dutch Shell plays a main role in Vanguard through different fund investments. The Royal Dutch Company, this I know you will like, BP, Vanguard Group, but there's another group that is called Vanguard Windsor. We could imagine all the elegance of that investment fund. Statoil of Norway plays a main role also in Vanguard. Bank of America prevails in Vanguard. Eni, Italian government that barged in the internal matters of Venezuela, is dominated by Vanguard. Even after the realistic cinema, post-war cinema, and President Denny was murdered. No, an accident. Lukoil, a private Russian company, Vanguard. The Rosneft's share in the stock market, it's a minority share. Here it is. PetroChina, Vanguard. This is China National Oil Company Limited. BlackRock share dominated by Vanguard. China Petroleum Chemical Corporation, Bank of America, BlackRock, these prevail in Vanguard. And Gazprom, one of the main investors, the Vanguard Investment Fund. So, we listed the oil companies. Now let's go with banks. Who prevails in the U.S. Federal Reserve? One of these is J.C. Morgan Chase, main holder, directly Vanguard. Bank of America, another of the BlackRock, is dominated by Vanguard. Citigroup, Vanguard. Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, BlackRock. Well, before we continue, we are all to the mercy of the same powers. The Rockefeller family and Rothschild family, big Lazar. There's also Israel Moses Save. Goldman Sachs family, Lehman family, they all associated. Very bright. In 1975, they created the investment fund. There's others like State Street, created in 1792. But Vanguard was created in 1974 with a neoliberal wave to hide the capital of the great families that command the world in order to conceal it and reduce the risk because they all share investments and everything. It's a very bright move. And in the market, it's not easy to conceal. They are the same reals because they command stock markets. I don't know if you agree with me, but this proves the Marxist method of analysis of reality was concealed. But this proves that the Marxist analysis method you studied in the Central University is perfectly applied by capital concentration. Now, taking this to our reality, we can see that the parallel dollar has no economic solution. This is interesting. I want to clarify that my analysis is not Marxist, but it's Christian. The results are the same. Well, I see Marxism and Christianity very similar. When it is time to tell the truth, there are coincidences. So the parallel dollar, yes, because Marxism is an analysis method of capitalism. Then comes Marxism-Leninism, which is the application of Marx to the Tsarist Russian reality, which resulted in the Soviet Union. And what is left of the Soviet Union, armed forces, intelligence, and industrial bases, gives us Russia, a world power, and very consistent, marking its influence area and expanding. But look at the alliances. Vanguard has alliances in all oil multinationals. They cultivate a relatively low profile. They show their power where they have to. Because you have Venezuelan destabilization, and behind that you had oil corporations that contribute to the think tankers to destroy the state. But under the oil companies is Vanguard, which is the great families. Pure and simple capitalism. Can you mention some of the families? Well, we already mentioned Rothschild, Rockefeller, Goldman Sachs, Lehman. All this sounds to Old Testament. Israel, Moses Safe, Italy, Lazar, France. I would have to review this, but this is the German one that has the Hamburg Bank. All these are the world capitals. What a coincidence. These instrument the orders for the governments of those countries are subjected to these families and express their contrary opinion against the Bolivarian Revolution. They command the Federal Reserve, and they brought down the sterling pound. We have no control over the parallel dollar. It's part of the economic war against Venezuela to take their oil results. Why don't we have control? Because of their financial power at the time of placing an exchange rate that does not respond to offer and supply, but to an imposition, forceful imposition by these families who hold the power, the global power, and which strategy is to destabilize Venezuela, place the Venezuelan people against a revolutionary government that is struggling for that people in order to appropriate the oil companies. But we do have a possible strategy, Walter. With the increase of the recovery factor from 20 to 40%, we will collect a tax for access to reserves, as President Chavez did, to the great corporations. That tax means thousands of millions of billions of dollars. Are they willing to pay it, or is it cheaper to try to bring their own government? They already tried that. We have a consensus now that peace through negotiation is the mechanism. This is my vision. Yes, we must acknowledge what is recognizable, and the transnational corporations all have supported in their way the peace process in Venezuela after the disaster created by the parties. And we started a negotiation process where, as we said, the first to ratify and thank the presence of our partners through mixed companies. Secondly, we should increase what is called reserve from 20 to 40% of the oil underground will become reserves in the Orinoco Basin. But we start a negotiation process with whoever commands the Federal Reserve. So we're in the great leagues. They command oil companies. This Lucky Martin is here. Boeing, aircraft producer Microsoft, computers, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and something that you think will be very important, Time Warner's, owners of CNN, ABC, and NBC. They own all the U.S. television spectrum. They all send ideas to the neurons of TV watchers. And we're no longer the romantic times of Walter Cronkite. They own Walt Disney, the same guy who owns the weapons industry owns Walt Disney, children's programs, the media. This is the real world. We have found the real world, but look at the strategy. How to struggle against this power, which is the responsible of the level of impoverished Venezuelan people against 30 million inhabitants. Well, the tax we are going to collect, which is our proposal due to access to reserves, because we have to comply with multinationals to be taken seriously, and they are taking us seriously. We will index to what we believe is the disproportion in the price of the parallel dollar. The parallel dollar could make us lose millions and millions of dollars. Well, we're going to recover it through the tax we will collect from oil companies, because you have the oil company, the board of the directors is according to the company, and the shareholder, the majority shareholders. Our tacit agreement with the shareholders was a peaceful process, ratification, and increase of reserves that benefits the Venezuelan state and benefits multinationals. But since these transnationals, the agreements is made with the presidents of the companies that we all know are very smart, and the capitals of those companies are the same as those who impose the economic war through U.S. banks, well, we're going to charge what their shareholders do through a tax for the access to reserves they need so much, because they are being depleted even in Saudi Arabia. This is news. From the study is what we learned. That is why President Chavez created the Socialist Oil Observatory. Well, only one of the researchers remain because multinationals know that the great danger that think tanks have determined, and that to have a think tank in a country that should be depending. So our investigations have conducted us to this proposal. These researches have made us have success and contribute with President Maduro's peaceful policy, which we have here. So there are two options I propose you. Under my responsibility as a constituent, I propose all multinationals to the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, State Street, commanded by Vanguard, and the great families, the large families of the world. You place the parallel dollar in 50,000 bolivares, but I impose a tax as PDVSA, the Ministry of Oil, fixes the tax for the access to reserves 50 times more expensive because that is limitless, and they need reserves even more than what we need the control of the parallel dollar to avoid inflation in food and medicines that clashes against the people of Venezuela. I think that the control of the parallel dollar should be through the military because, well, that's a geopolitical problem, not an economic problem. And the armed forces have fulfilled their role, which is the full sovereignty of the Venezuelan state and the control over the state. We don't have an armed forces that is chase. It's a people in uniform, according to their reality and future. That's clear. Now comes geopolitics. When I tell you I'm going to collect a tax to compensate the price of parallel dollar, the presidents of the company will call their companies and say, look at their game. They will charge us as a company what you do to them, to the Venezuelan people through the parallel dollar. As President Maduro, that is fixed outside. So since we have supported the peace, let's determine a mixed company to calculate the price of parallel dollar. And in this, we will also establish a mixed company to calculate the reserves. Do you think that's realistic? 100%. Do you think there's any other possibility? We'll make a pause and we'll be right back.
más acontecimientos en pleno desarrollo y los tenemos aquí en nuestro escenario característico de Dossier. Y tenemos al profesor Fernando Travieso, economista, magíster cienciario, un experto petrolero y un hombre que está poniendo el dedo en el ventilador. Hay cosas que parecían intocables, ¿no? Por ejemplo, la libra esterlina, el Banco de Inglaterra, por lo tanto. Y de repente aparece un señor Soros y desafía la libra esterlina. ¿Cómo puede ocurrir eso en la lógica capitalista de un mundo occidental?
Y dicen que Soros es un representante de la familia Rothschild. Y entonces imagínate el grupo Vanguard, donde está Rockefeller, los Rockefeller y los Rothschild juntos, con unos mismos intereses. Evidentemente que el dólar paralelo.
The Rockefeller family, the parallel dollar is not a problem of economic measure. As an instrument of war, it's a complete symmetric war against the people of Venezuela. You drop the price of oil, producing with loss through fracking, that we still don't know what repercussions will have. And then with a parallel dollar, you generate induced inflation, artificial, and then you come with all the destabilization through the laboratory parties that created the oil translations and the U.S. government in due time with that was an agreement between Carlos Andrés Pérez and the oil corporations, where the managers became the managers of PDVSA. This is unbelievable. Placing the cheese and the rat to take care of the cheese. Yes, and the world comes upon us. Walter, what we spoke last time I was here. 1902, they blocked Venezuelan coasts. And now that we're talking that because of oil and from coal to oil, they have commanded us for 100 years. We didn't know, at least nobody, I haven't heard there's a single owner of all oil companies. The weapons were the media. This is something innovating. Therefore, we must understand that the statement of the problem, as we would say in college, is different to what we have seen before. What we have is one absolute power that handles the economy and has a superstructure that conceals it. If you take that superstructure away, we reach the families of pure, simple, historic capitalism of the planet Earth that come for our oil companies, and their strategy is parallel oil. They are coming for the reserves. How do you combat these instruments, these families that order the U.S. government? The only who can get angry against Mr. Tillerson when he left ExxonMobil were the shareholders. I understand now. It was the Vanguard Group, because he fled control. Tillerson criticized the U.S. President, Trump. We still don't have clear awareness of the value of lobby in U.S. Government. I had a great friend in the U.S. Embassy and told me, you criticize us directly, but here there's you as Christian, Catholic, leftist, we understand each other, we understand your sensitivity. This is for chief of foreign affairs heads. And they placed me in that course, coast to coast, with agriculture law in Iowa, the Pacific in California, Texas. We visited the United States from coast to coast, and there were opinion leaders, the chief of foreign affairs there, and I was the only journalist there. I was a fly on the milk. They say it was the most disturbing among the guests, but the result was that I ended with a visit in Congress and the White House. But I'm still learning, or I thanked for that opportunity because doesn't understand the role of lobbying, doesn't understand the U.S. policy. And when you state that the families like Rothschild and Rockefeller were looking at cruelty at planet scale, and when they left control, they forced Walter Cronkite to retire at an early age from the TV chain because he was public opinion. And the same they did before with Edward Moore. So they swept with that. The journalists usually have their own opinion, and that is disturbing. And that is direct handling of public opinion. President Trump tried to implement reinforcing policies of the U.S. state duty barriers, and it touched the interest of this investment fund Vanguard. Since it's a global power, the nation state is a problem in their global planning. And in 2 weeks, they had President Trump with the possibility of an impeachment with a witness, the former director of FBI. Imagine in 2 weeks. So the loyalty, the FBI declared against the commander-in-chief. Well, the U.S. Intelligence chain, accepting Russian and Chinese, respond to Vanguard. And we are confronting them. They have so much power that nobody tells it. They are hidden. Well, it has a cost to say it, but the cost for the country of not saying is worse. In the United States, you can't say it, but the cost of not saying is a treasure to the legacy of Supreme Commander Hugo Chavez, of the liberators of all Venezuelans, because they will destroy our state if we don't place ourselves in reality. So that reality, the new director of Vanguard Fund will be here the first days of January. Imagine the knowledge that man has. That will not disappear, and we as a nation will not disappear either. We have to reach a point of cohabitation. There's no other solution. But Linus Pauling said, peace for terror. Since we can destroy each other, it's better to choose peace, and we leave the Cold War. But this applied to business and the control of oil reserves. The source of energy that keeps all the system that makes Vanguard the investment fund that controls 75% of the production of Western goods and services. This leads to a question. That course in Fletcher School I always thanked, and where I was one of the most active and more disturbing, I must say. We learned, for example, speculation with agricultural surplus, University of Iowa, business with Pacific, California oil, Texas. But the curricula never had the industrial military apparatus and the Israeli participation. Not even in Vanguard page. Chip Martin is the largest manufacturer of weapons in the world. Walt Disney belongs to Vanguard. So it's power. Microsoft. So we start educating children to create preconcepts. Bill Gates is a creation of Vanguard, just like Carlos Slim, for them to appear as the richest man and conceal under them. How many generations do Rothschild and Rockefeller have? They are not interested. They have a low profile, but keeping world control, and they choose two characters that, compared with them, are insignificant. as Carlos Slim and Bill Gates. And I can prove it to you. Bill Gates in Microsoft has 166 million shares. Vanguard has 3.4 billion shares only in Microsoft. And you can imagine the rest. So here we have to place ourselves in our reality. And since the dollar for them is a geopolitical problem, it doesn't have nothing to do with supply and demand. So the exchange policy control is correct for the moment. The neoliberal model proposes free exchange that depletes it. But whatever you do, they will establish the exchange rate. If they did it with the UK, tell me what they're going to do with Venezuela. Perhaps you don't remember, since I was educated in Uruguay, that defeated the British fleet twice. But we had everything British. We drove on the left side until we nationalized everything. That difference tells you that they have a colonial style and they watch their own future interests. But what the United States is doing now with its Cold War propaganda is nothing compared to what the British did very eloquently. Uruguay was a British fax. And that's why I'm called Walter Nelson, which is crazy, but it was normal at the time. The world wanted to imitate the British model, just as at a given time they want to imitate the Roman Empire, the barbarians. What they want to be is Roman. When I was a child, they were driving on the left, and then when the United States won the Second War, we changed the system. Well, Vanguard makes an exception with the British monarchy and created Vanguard Windsor in the energy area. Through a fund called Vanguard Energy, they control the world energy system, they control the navies. So we have to negotiate strongly, decisively, knowing who we are confronting and seeking understanding that is achieved with forceful demonstrations, because this peace we have thanks to the strategy of President Nicolás Maduro, and I dare to say thanks to the strength of oil workers who were willing even to destroy the oil infrastructure, contrary to what happened in Iraq with the invasion. I knew Saddam Hussein's Iran. It worked perfectly. Shiites to the side, Sunnis to the center, and Kurds to the north in peace, with their own media, their own legislation, their own language and schools. Look at the chaos. I'm sorry, but I don't understand what happened upon that. I visited Gaddafi's Libya. Everything was chaos in Iraq except oil production. It's above 5 million barrels per year. When it worked under OPEC, they commended. When we left to the war front, sometimes we escaped to Beirut, which was called the Eastern Paris, in a very British pub. The students wanted to study in the U.S. University, and there the students forgot they were Muslims. They loved whiskey, and they vindicated the price of oil. I remember a redneck oil guy who banged on the table and screamed at them, saying that, telling them that it was Venezuela who created OPEC and not you. There was a moment, I think you would agree with me, where they increased, OPEC increased the oil prices, but it was also benefiting. The thing is that the depletion of oil reserves, and given the fact that the policy is to create chaos in countries with reserves and they need to drop prices, that scarcity makes of OPEC a problem. So the strategy is to create chaos in the countries with reserves. So it's not surprising that our neighbors in Colombia have 7 bases, and they grant air, sea, and land space to the United States. Walter, I ask you, who do you believe purchased 30% of Ecopetrol with privatization? Vanguard. They started in great leagues. It's real power. This is realpolitik, and we have to cohabit with that power. We're not going to eliminate them. They are not going to eliminate us. They know, and they're listening that we know. And as the cost for them is prohibitive if they pretend to eliminate us. We have confronted real politics, and now that the armed forces knows that there are 2 positions, or you are with the great families, US and European families that control the world, or you're with the Venezuelan people to defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity. What the strategy of these big families is to destroy nations, to plan without any impediment a globalized world according to their interests. And the nation becomes an obstacle because they want to be sovereign on their natural resources that are reserves. But that will be well used, will be our strength. Just as President Chavez managed to make CELAC and UNASUR with the oil factor. Now, we have to give and take. Yes, and it opened the road to investments. For example, there's a company that's very interesting, that is Petrocopec and Petroanglo-Copec, which is the share of the Republic of Cuba and Angola. Since Vanguard doesn't participate there, the attack against those companies is huge. They provide areas with insignificant reserves. I believe that the big transnationals are great partners for their investment capacity, provided 60% of the shares belong to the Venezuelan state, non-negotiable, and we have them fully controlled, and we establish a big bonus imposed for the access to reserves that will allow to make to improve the Venezuelan economy. We have good technology, but here I have it. Halliburton, guess who it belongs to? Vanguard. Schlumberger, which is French. Who does it belong? Vanguard. So imagine, Interweb, science and technology to the service of oil industry, has to compete with these monsters. For example, Halliburton commanded Iraq with Dick Cheney. I pay tribute from the president of PDVSA to our peers who are in charge of cleaning and cooking in PDVSA. I deal with all, and those people have endured a strong coup by transnationals, all oil workers. They are still suffering. They are the great powers because they all agree, transnationals, that Venezuelan transnationalism is an impediment to their interests and a poor example. what that man in the Lebanese pub was saying, telling the sons of the millionaires, you are there because Venezuela showed you how. You have a PDVSA manager that under inhumane pressures of the foreign companies, they want to block the production of byproducts in Venezuela because of the U.S. refining park. They are violating human rights of that manager, that worker, the supervisor in PDVSA. You publish as inefficient workers. I call a collective rebellion of PDVSA workers against such mistreatment. I haven't heard that. This is unprecedented. You cannot continue to permit this. It's unacceptable. It's a world war for the control of reserves, and Venezuelan oil companies subjected to all world pressures because they want to destroy it. The thing is that what stock market says that the value of a company are their reserves. Everything they will do will be useless because they know that PDVSA has more value than any of its vanguard company. Our capacity, negotiation capacity, is the need to access the reserves that corporations have. During the campaign for the Constitutional, we talked about peace, ratification of transnational companies, and increase of recovery factor to make Venezuela have more than 500 billion barrels, which benefits the people of Venezuela and our partners. In order to reach that, they have to pay an access bond that, in my opinion, should be according to the behavior of the parallel dollar. Vanguard, eleva the parallel dollar. You want to compete with who rises it more? We're willing. You want to be reasonable and negotiate? We are willing. The parallel dollar, the scarcity of medication, because Vanguard is also owner of Pfizer, I think. It belongs to the Vanguard Group. It's one single problem, one single economic global group that commands the planet and wants our oil reserves. And it's not a euphemism, it's coming for the reserves. We have verified in the pages of the Stock Market Commission. They also have bases in Aruba, Curacao, Guyana, trying to subvert South American order through Brazil. The 18 persons who attended the National Assembly not to ratify the role of the Constituent Assembly are the dolls of Vanguard. Well, I think we have concluded our time. So wherever you are on the other side of the screen, if you didn't feel any anger with this, you must be on the side of the enemy. But anyway, I respect your reaction. Our duty is to inform and interpret and give you options for you to form your own criteria. And Professor Fernando Travieso, expert in oil, has showed why it was a pleasure to have you here. Each time you would like to add something in such a pedagogic and patriot way, we're surrounded by traitors now, and I'm not talking about the channel or the country. I'm talking about our neighbors. We will be back tomorrow when our dear contaminated and only spacecraft has turned once again around its imaginary axis with news update. Walter Martinez, producer and conductor of Dossier. This program belongs to Venezolana Televisión.
señor director.
Good night.